Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I am your host, Wendy Nystrom. Today, our special guest is Mr. Charles Henry. He is the president of the Council of Library and Information Resources and recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So welcome to the show, Charles.
Thank you, Wendy. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, no, thank you for your time. I mean, you are very busy and you have been doing a lot for, the world of library sciences. But most importantly, could you just explain real quick what CLIR does?
Sure. CLIR's been in business for about 65 years, and we started out back in the late 1950s in response to the proliferation of all kinds of mostly academic information, but cultural information in general. In those days, that included microfilm and microfiche and television, which was surging at the time, radio broadcasts, and it was also a period where academic publishers began to greatly increase their productivity. So many thousands and thousands of new books were being published on top of all the other media. CLIR was formed in order to try to make sense of this, to try to organize and make coherent this tidal wave of information and knowledge. And so we've been doing that for nearly 65 years. We continue to do that. We're much more involved, obviously, in the digital information right now, and digital knowledge, digital libraries. And we're also, as part of making sense of the world, we are thoroughly challenged by climate change, its disruption, and the potential enormity of the loss that climate change is likely to entail on the cultural heritage.
I like the fact that you mentioned that climate change is affecting these things. And with the digital era, I'm sure you're getting inundated with information. But a little fun side note, there's going to be a group of people that have no idea what microfiche is.
Oh, okay. They're lucky.
They're lucky. Guys, trust us. You don't want to have to know what this is.
Yes, yeah.
But when you talk about what you guys do, so preserving your cultural heritage, especially with respect to how climate change is affecting us, and climate migration of people that have to leave their ancestral homes to move somewhere else, how do we preserve this? How are we going to save our information?
It's very complicated. We have at CLIR, we've developed a new project. We're starting, are now underway with a new project that we call Pangea. And Pangea is it's a reference to the world about 300 million years ago when the continents were all together. You could, if we were around, you could walk from one end of the terrestrial world to the other. And of course, since that time, the continents have split up and are now separated by vast amount of water. And in the concept of Pangea is to try to look at the digital world as a single entity, as something that you can walk across, at least figuratively, through various applications and tools. And Pangea is it's organized by three different elements, I'd say. One is focused on the accumulation and access to information pertaining to climate change. Pangea is first and foremost a response from our organization and others to the disruptive and potential and the crisis, I think, that we're quickly coming into now with the changes in climate. So the first element is looking at ways to organize, make accessible, and use a vast amount of information, both scientific and humanistic, on the changing climate. The second is to focus on tangible culture that is threatened by climate change. And that's our main focus right now, is working with universities and cultural institutions in Africa, which will be particularly hard hit by desertification, rising sea levels, wildfires, droughts, the whole gamut of disruption. And so we're working with these organizations now to identify archives as well as other kinds of material culture that can be digitized preserved and then sustained over time, made accessible to the world. Most of this information is not digitally accessible at this point. Most of it will be threatened by these climate upheavals. So we're trying to work with them now to preserve as best we can this cultural heritage that is likely to be damaged or lost. And this information, it can include archives, it can include books, it can include manuscripts and drawings and artwork. It also, in Africa, there's a tremendous amount of biodiversity information, scientific information pertinent to climate change. We want to make sure that that gets made available, made accessible as well. The last piece is looking at ways to preserve less tangible culture. And this is where migration and refugees and displaced people come into play. The amount of cultural information, the amount of our collective cultural heritage that is less tangible is huge. This includes theater performances and songs. It includes language itself. It includes religious ritual that's passed on from generation to generation. It also includes knowledge, and knowledge that's part of oral traditions that's not written down. And so that's the third leg, if you will, of Pangea, looking at communities that are likely to be displaced, a large-scale diaspora that is already underway, and then how to preserve through digitization and various tools and applications to make that cultural heritage accessible. The preservation of less tangible culture is extremely delicate and deeply personal in many respects. And because of its often fleeting nature, it's very hard to capture, particularly in trying to make it more or less permanently accessible. So we have a lot of work cut out for us. A couple of statistics: the estimated number of people who will be displaced, and that's internally to their national boundaries, external to their national boundaries, refugees, forced displacement, is estimated to be about 220 million people by 2015. That's staggering. Another sad statistic is, I think it was in June this year, for the first time in recorded history, over 100 million people were categorized as displaced or refugees. I think 20-some million were refugees, and a little bit over 100 million total were displaced. So it's not like we're going to need to wait around until 2050. We need to get to work right now, because this kind of disruption, this disruption of the human population and the potential loss that it entails, is very hard to grasp. I look at this as, at this scale, we're losing our humanity.
Yes.
And we really need to, we must address this. We must.
You know, I'm just going to start being a geologist. I love the fact you named it Pangea. You know, little nod there to our history. But you brought up so many important factors of the climate migration aspect. What people don't realize is climate migration this is when people are displaced from their ancestral homes. They have to move due to fire, heat, flood, lack of agriculture. Think about that. When it's too hot or too wet, your land goes away. So these people are forced to move. Recording some stories. I mean, I know in African tribes, a lot of communication is done orally. A lot of storytelling is done orally. So I'm assuming you record these stories to preserve them. And then when people are forced to move from their ancestral lands, they adopt their new culture that they moved to. So that history could easily be lost. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, that's exactly what you guys are focusing on.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And, you know, it's important also to note that when a population or a community or a group of people are displaced, and say forced to move beyond their national boundaries and into a foreign land, to a foreign culture. There's an aspect of survival to that, and there's also, I think, inherent to us as human beings, this search to continue to live in dignity.
Yes.
And that dignity often it revolves around the continuation of the culture. That's part of a quality of life, a quality of mind that we have. And you raise a really important point, because when particularly smaller communities, let's say smaller linguistic communities that have had their language, their own language, and say for thousands of years, they get displaced. They go to another area of the world that has no knowledge of their language, no knowledge of their culture or their customs or their rituals. And the tendency, as again a matter of survival and living with in a way that is as least disruptive as possible, is assimilation. And that assimilation, then you can lose your language itself. It goes away as less and less people speak it, of course, and the next generation begins to speak the local language as a matter to survive, to get around. So, and with the loss of that language, of course, comes the loss of all the references that language has brought with it to the landscape, to the world that was left behind, to the objects, and to the meaning of those objects and those performances in this case. So it's extremely complex, and it's most of what we are trying to do, will be trying to do, is to create oral histories of those who are displaced as much as we can, and try to capture now the kinds of more fleeting aspects of culture, like song, like dance, like theater performances, and when we can, various kinds of rituals.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you mentioned the climate migration and, maintaining someone's identity. When people do move to other countries, they're forced to move, they're immigrants, they are going to face exclusion and discrimination. And they will do everything possible to try to fit into their new home. And that is the unfortunate side effect of losing someone's cultural history. And you lose that resilience to maintain your identity, which is so important to many of these communities. And we've done that in our own country, in the US. I mean, when the Native Americans, they lost a lot of their history, and we have very few recordings of Native American song and dance and language. And quite honestly, let's think about World War II with the Navajos and the Code Talkers. They saved us with their language. And had we lost that, who knows what would have happened? So this is so connected through generations of hundreds of years. How can people help you? How can people find you and work with you and move this forward?
Well, I think we will begin to publicize the work on Pangea much more aggressively this year and into the coming years. And there will be notices about what we're doing and what kind of assistance we can benefit from. Having people aware of these challenges is a great first step. And climate change and its likely devastating effects, a lot of understanding climate requires a kind of thinking in a complex systems way. And so this Pangea is meant to emulate that kind of thinking, to make these connections much more apparent, more visible, and also, as you note, how to allow and encourage people to get more involved with this, which could be participating in some of these projects, as well as thinking differently, or thinking in a way that better accommodates solutions to this challenge. You mentioned the way people, when they leave a certain geographic region and go to a new one, and often, there is a loss. One of the most poignant and I think touching areas of research that is focused on that particular phenomenon is a colleague of mine named Elizabeth Brabeck, and she is at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She's a historian of architectural landscape. She teaches the history of landscape and architectural landscape. And over the years, she has been rigorously examining refugees in their camps, and particularly a phenomenon where refugees, when they get resettled, which is often in a very fragile environment, often with tents and non-permanent buildings, nonetheless, what many of them do is to build gardens around where they live. And she studied this, and I can send you some links to her work. And the refugees will plant gardens. They try to find plants that are similar to the ones that they knew in their gardens at home, and they're in a small but profoundly important way. They're trying to replicate what they lost, or trying to recreate that environment that they left behind through these small, beautiful gardens. And that just, to me, epitomizes and symbolizes the depth, the profundity of what it means to be displaced, how we try to hang on to what we have lost, try to replicate it, try to reproduce it in a foreign and often hostile land.
Oh, yeah. And the mental well-being that you would need to try to maintain. I mean,
Yes.
you've lost everything. You've probably only taken what you can carry, which
Yes.
for many people, that's not a whole lot. You take the bare necessities, probably heirlooms and family mementos you had to leave behind. So just having a garden, just having some little piece of your homeland with you to try to keep you somewhat sane in a very uncomfortable environment, vastly important. And just these little steps. If you could name maybe 2 or 3 cultures that you feel are most at risk, that you're trying to focus on, are there? I mean, I'm sure there's more than 2 or 3, but what would be your top?
Well, I would refer to what's called the groundswell report, the more recent groundswell report, and you can send links to that as well. And the groundswell, that came out about 2018, 2019. It identified 3 parts of the world that are most likely to be highly disrupted and damaged by climate change. One is sub-Saharan Africa. The other was the Mekong Delta region in Asia, Southeast Asia, and Latin America was the third. They did not, in this report, touch upon the Pacific Islands, which are being submerged even as we speak. That, I think, is one area that we know is literally vanishing before our eyes. Another somewhat more recent crisis is in the Arctic, and that's with the melting, the thawing of the tundra, and the release of methane gas, which exacerbates significantly the heating, and also because there are a lot of organic materials under the soil that are now thawed. There are fires that are starting up underground, and which also burns, and it's on and on it goes.
On and on and on. Yep. Zombie fires, I think they called them.
Yes, yeah. So I would say, offhand, those are the regions that are most likely in the next 20 to 30 years to be affected, or in some cases devastated by climate change. But I think we need to also recognize that really no country, no community, no society is going to be spared from this, however wealthy. We looked at statistics in the United States, and I think of our cultural institutions in the U.S., I believe it's 98% will be somehow affected by climate change. And these are among the wealthiest, the most smartly administered cultural institutions in the world. I was reading, I think, a couple months ago where the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. was beginning to experience flooding from rising waters from underneath, from the Potomac, essentially, that was beginning to encroach. That's the Smithsonian. And no one will be spared of this. But I think the more visible devastation will be in those particular regions that I mentioned.
We definitely have a lot of work to do. And, I was recently interviewing someone who said, stop calling it climate change. It's climate, it's here. And we need to start acting. We need to actually address these issues now rather than keep having conferences, keep writing papers. So the work you're doing is monumentally important to maintaining cultural heritage and, identity. And you're a nonprofit, right?
That's
CLIR
right.
So people could donate. So folks donate to CLIR. That's the Council on Library and Information Resources. Please tell people how they can find you and, the best way that they could donate to help keep this alive, keep this moving forward.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. That's we are easily located through the web at CLIR.org, and you should be able to. We should pop up right away when you type that in, and you can get in touch with any of us. There's a general CLIR email address that I can send out if people are interested in learning more about what we're doing. If people are interested in donating, that would be grand. But I'll send you those addresses and links and see what may come of that.
That would be perfect. I cannot support this enough, guys. Please donate if you can. Reach out to help. You guys do take volunteers to help with getting these programs going, I can assume. Just anyone who wants to help.
We try, yeah. We really do encourage. We're getting to a point where this kind of volunteer participation is going to be more and more important. And I want to say this too. My CLIR, my organization has been involved with sustainability issues for ever since it got founded. And in the old days, sustainability was often conceived of having money. So you would get even more recently grants from the National Science Foundation, and some private foundation would say there would be a box that says, which would ask, is this project, if we invest in this, is this sustainable? And people would check the box. Sure, yeah, sustainable. What was often meant was, is there going to be longer term financial support of this project? Often there is. But even if you have a project and you get funded and it roars ahead and does very good things, at some point the money will run out. And oftentimes what's left in a financial sense is not much. And so the project, however grand it might have been conceived and executed, often becomes diminished. What we're trying to do now is to inculcate a new concept of sustainability, and I call it effective community sustainability. So projects like Pangea, the pieces of this, when we work with the African institutions, there's training that's involved, on-the-site training, digitization, how to digitize, how to mark this up, how metadata is trained. We encourage that the resources that are generated from this project be incorporated, become integral to teaching, become integral to research, that these are transgenerational activities. The generation now that's working will train the next incoming class, the next young people coming in, and on it goes. So rather than saying, we want all this money, what we really want is engagement of people who would become integral to the preservation of this work through their actions and through their involvement over time. So that's another piece of this. I think that's very important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just love the fact that you're bringing people together, not only preserving cultural heritage worldwide, multicultural, but getting young people involved, getting, maybe even retirees that had library sciences in their background. And it's like, I'm not done yet. I still want to contribute to the world. This is an excellent opportunity to do that and, do worldwide good. So on that, folks, I'm going to let you know, please donate to CLIR. It's CLIR.org. Reach out to Charles and his group, help them out, get involved. This is monumentally important for the preservation of our cultural heritage. So on that, Charles, I thank you so much for joining us. I'm Wendy Nystrom, your host with Environmental Social Justice. You guys have a great day, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Wendy. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.